So I was just listening to a podcast between Marty Bent and Leo Zhang, the founder of Annika Research. They were talking about mining. They were talking about a migration of mining operations from China to the United States. And one of the points that Marty Bent made was how in the US there's sort of a arbitrage of political jurisdictions. Not only do you have the pros and cons of what you get from the US federal government, but it can also take advantage of a state-by-state sort of arbitrage. And one of the points he made about that was a reassertion of states' rights. And it was then that it clicked in my mind that what we're seeing is something that is an example of a very large trend that, if you look at the markers, moves in slow motion. And that is the slow decentralization of governance, the decentralization of how humans organize themselves. Very often the book, The Sovereign Individual, written in the 90s by James Dale Davidson and Lord Rees-Mogg, talks about a world where the premium on violence, the advantage of centralized violence and the harnessing of force, has reached its apex and is starting to unwind, where now it is smaller actors, the smaller nation states, the individuals, who are going to be exercising political force. And we see this referenced in the last year or two in the Bitcoin space with a recognition of how the world is slowly starting to move in that direction. And it's been moving in that direction. What we're seeing is this process live, the sovereign individual, in a reference of how very often, I'll stay right now, kind of giving away my age a little bit, I grew up during the Cold War. And when you see predictions of I think it was 1992, 93, where Harry Dent published a book talking about how the national debt would grow so large that bankruptcy would happen. It might have been called Bankruptcy 1995. And during those times, when you're in the middle of a system, when you talk about changes that are going to occur, very often it's difficult to see these things or even witness them. And you question these things and think, will they happen? I mean, people think that about the end of the fiat monetary system when we're due for a historic crash of levels not seen since 2008 and then some, which certainly systemic risks and how weak the system is, how corroded the monetary base is, that can happen. A zero. Though I think what we've been witnessing is a slow motion decline. I watched a video that I had in one of my View Later playlists on one of my YouTube channels. It's definitely the potential to happen, and it's definitely higher than, and it talked about the 1300 to decline of the late Bronze Age civilization. This goes back to Greece had its high water mark. The one thing that he said was Rome didn't end in what's that, 436 AD. It was a slow motion decline that took a century to happen, 1100 BCE. This is before even Rome came about. This is before the decline of civilization in the late Bronze Age. It was very likely a cascade of events that led to a slow decline. The end of feudalism was a slow decline. The Eastern Mediterranean didn't happen in 1 year. The end of a lot of long-standing social structures, be it economic, social, political, they decline over time. And I think what we're seeing with our current monetary system and our current global system of, as I dub it, centralization everything, the old world, that too is a slow motion decline. We're going to see this unwind in front of us in slow motion, from the amount of money that the US federal government is printing, debasing the currency with absolute abandon, to the slow breakup governance to a smaller and smaller scale, where the states are beginning to assert themselves because the needs and changes of people are not being met on a federal level. That's probably because that information can't make it up there. We're being governed by Helen Keller pre-breakthrough stage of it's blind, deaf, and dumb. The information it's getting it's backdated governance. As someone commented even, the federal government's view of Bitcoin on a collective level is like a 2013 or 2015 level. It is so behind the times. But we are seeing it now. It is happening. And it's not going to be a sudden break where a state's going to break off. It's just that the rules dictated within a jurisdiction, like say related to COVID, or say, yes, exactly related to COVID, as far as being open, being closed, how it's handled medically, socially, where the divide in jurisdictions, the divide in governance, the divide in how people want to live, it's happening now. That helped move that process forward, where people are moving to the more open states. There's a definite difference between the two. And the more closed states, politically, socially, economically, governance. And this is what I wanted to point out. In the United States, using that as a bellwether, it is happening. The slow and steady decentralization is happening. It's happening. I'm Brian Cost, your host, and these are Side Notes.